80 years old, that's what I am. 80 years old. And the address on my last tax return, the last time I filed 4 years ago, is a parking lot behind a ShopRite in Newark, New Jersey. I actually wrote it in the little box. Parking lot off McCarter Highway, Newark, because that is where I sleep. That is where I live. In a 2009 Ford Taurus with 217,000 miles on the odometer, a sleeping bag I bought at a Walmart in Trenton for $12, and a plastic grocery bag with 3 changes of clothes folded as neatly as I can manage. I used to manage client portfolios worth $340 million. I had a corner office on the 42nd floor of a building on 6th Avenue that you would recognize if I told you the name. I had a house in Greenwich, Connecticut, 4 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, a view of Long Island Sound that on clear mornings made you believe the world had been arranged specifically for your benefit. I had a wife for 31 years and 2 sons who knew my voice the way you know the smell of your own home. I had a life that men cut out of magazines and tacked to the walls of their cubicles. And I am here, in this car, in this parking lot, eating a 50-cent pack of peanut butter crackers and watching a security light flicker above the loading dock. You think this is a story about bad luck? Then you're not ready for what I'm about to say. But stay anyway, because what I'm going to tell you is the thing no one will ever say out loud at your dinner table, and you need to hear it before you think you're safe. Don't go anywhere. Hear this to the end. If it stays with you, and it will stay with you, subscribe. Leave a comment, not as a fan, as a witness, because witnessing is the only thing I still have the right to ask for. My name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that in 1986, when I was 40 years old, I sat down at a conference table in Midtown Manhattan and closed the deal that earned my division more money in a single afternoon than most Americans make in a lifetime. There were handshakes, there was champagne, there was somewhere, there must be somewhere, a photograph of me in a blue suit with my hand in the air like I had just conquered something. I thought I had. I grew up in Scranton, Pennsylvania. My father worked in railroad administration. My mother cleaned houses on Saturdays to help pay for my college applications. They were not wealthy people, but they were people who believed, truly, completely believed, that if you worked hard and kept your head down and made the right moves, the world would reward you. And they were right. They were right about me for a while. I got into Penn, Wharton School. My mother cried when the letter came. My father shook my hand and didn't say much. But that night I heard him in the kitchen, and his voice had a sound I had never heard from him before. Pride. Real, full-chested pride. The kind that sits in a man's chest like a stone. I graduated near the top of my class, got recruited by 4 banks, chose the one with the most powerful name, and never looked back. By 32, I was an associate VP. By 38, I had my first 7-figure bonus. By 42, I had the Greenwich House. Not a burden, a trophy. Proof that every early morning and every missed weekend had meant something. Sandra and I had been married since we were 26. She was a 4th grade teacher when we met, at a public school in Queens, and she never stopped being a teacher at heart. She was the most grounded person in any room we ever walked into. She kept me honest. She raised Kevin and Daniel with a steadiness I don't have a word for. She was the architecture of everything. I thought I was building our life. She was the foundation. We threw dinner parties on Saturday nights. Neighbors would come. A cardiologist from down the road. A woman who ran a regional theater. A couple who'd met at Columbia Law. And Sandra would cook, and the house would fill up with noise and laughter. And I'd open a bottle of Barolo I'd been saving, and I'd feel it, that absolute bone-deep certainty that I had made it. Not just made it, I had done the thing. Whatever the thing was, I had arrived. I remember one evening, must have been 1994, maybe 1995. Kevin was around 12, Daniel 9, and after the guests had gone home, the boys came downstairs in their pajamas. Kevin looked up at me and said, "Dad, someday I want to have parties like this." And I picked him up. He was almost too big for me to lift. And I laughed and I said, "You will, buddy. You absolutely will." That memory is the one that comes for me in the middle of the night, out here in this parking lot. Not the deals, not the bonuses, not the office on the 42nd floor. A 12-year-old in pajamas, and that voice, and the fact that I held him and believed it completely. The first time I walked into a casino, I was 46 years old. Atlantic City, the Borgata, a client entertainment weekend the firm organized for 4 of us. Dinner, drinks, a walk through the floor because you had to, because that's what you did. I sat down at a blackjack table on a lark, put down $200 I didn't remotely need, and doubled it in 40 minutes. That was it. That was all it took. Not the money. $200 meant nothing to me at that point. It was the feeling. In 40 minutes of sitting at that table, the world had gone completely, perfectly quiet. The noise of everything, the mortgage, the performance reviews, the commute, the 1,000 invisible decisions of adult life, all of it disappeared. There was only the card, only the number, only what was coming next. I had been chasing that sensation without knowing it for years. On the trading floor in a volatile market, in a high-stakes negotiation, I found it. At the blackjack table, I found it for $20 a hand on a Tuesday night, with a gin and tonic in front of me. I didn't think of it as a problem. I was Robert Hargrove. I managed risk for a living. I understood probability, variance, expected value, mathematically, precisely, in ways that the man sitting next to me at the table did not. I told myself this made me different. I told myself I was an exception. I started making trips, not frequently at first. A long weekend here, a Thursday through Sunday there. Sandra thought they were golf trips, and some of them were golf trips, and then they were mostly not. In 1997 and 1998, I was up on net. I kept actual spreadsheets, because that's exactly who I was. I was up probably $65,000 over 2 years. Blackjack, some poker. The numbers supported my self-image as a disciplined, rational, exceptional player. Then I discovered sports betting. This was before it was legal everywhere. You had to know people. I knew people. Within 6 months, I had arrangements with 2 separate bookmakers, including a man in Hoboken I will only refer to as Eddie, and I was laying $4, $5, sometimes $8,000 on NFL Sundays. I had systems. I had data. I had conviction. The Sunday ritual became the center of my week in ways that Sandra didn't know and my boys didn't see. The first calendar year, I lost 6 figures. I told myself it was variance. The second year, the same story. By the third year, I was 53, and I had refinanced the Greenwich house once and opened a private credit line without telling Sandra. She was not a naive woman. She had begun to ask questions. I had become extraordinarily good at answering them with just enough truth to make the lie hold. What I didn't notice, what I had trained myself not to notice, was what was happening to my face. Sandra noticed. She told me this years later, after everything had collapsed. She said she had watched something go out behind my eyes over the course of about 18 months, like someone had reached in and dimmed a lamp that had always been on. The year I turned 60, the market turned, 2008. The firm wasn't Lehman, but it was close enough. Reorganizations, men in expensive suits who could not look you in the eye. At 60, I was walked to the door with a severance package that sounded generous until I did the arithmetic of what I owed. The total, when I finally sat down and let myself look at all the numbers in one place, to the banks, to Eddie, to the second bookmaker in Astoria, to the home equity line that had funded, in its final chapter, nothing but losing bets, was $1,260,000. Sandra found the spreadsheet, not the trading records, the other one, the ledger of bets. She sat at the kitchen table in Greenwich, and she read it. I know she read it for almost 2 hours, because I sat in the car in our own driveway, and I could see her through the dining room window, and I could not make myself go in. At 60 years old, in my own driveway, I sat in my own car because my body would not carry me through that door. When I finally went inside, she had printed the spreadsheet and placed it in the center of the table, and her eyes were dry. She had moved past crying. She said, "I don't know who you are." I said I could explain. She said, "There is nothing to explain, Robert." And she was right. There was nothing to explain. The numbers explained everything. She and the boys, Kevin was 26, Daniel 23, stayed in the house while it was sold. I moved to a studio apartment in Stamford. The divorce took 11 months. The house paid the mortgage and part of the debt. Sandra got a fair settlement because she deserved a fair settlement. I came out of 62 years of living with a car, a storage unit in Yonkers, and a checking account holding just over $7,000. I found work. I want to say this because it matters. I did not give up. At 62 with my resume, I found consulting work, advisory roles, some part-time compliance positions. It was enough to live on. It was not enough for what I needed it to be enough for, because I was still betting. I know how that sounds. I knew how it sounded then. But the addiction doesn't care that you understand it. I understood it, clinically, analytically, in every framework I knew, and it did not help. I sat alone in a studio apartment in Stamford, placing bets on my phone, understanding with perfect clarity that I was consuming what remained of my life, and I did it anyway. Game after game, Sunday after Sunday, the ritual of ruin, performed by a man who could calculate its exact cost in real time. Kevin stopped returning my calls when I was 67, not after a confrontation, no final argument. He just stopped answering. A month passed, then 2. I left messages that started formal and controlled and became toward the end something I can still hear if I let myself. Just a man talking into a phone in an empty room, hoping someone on the other end of the silence still cared. Daniel answered for another year. His last message to me, I have listened to it more times than I can count, was 2 sentences. He said, "I love you, Dad, but I can't watch this anymore." I was 68 when I lost the apartment. I had spent the last of what I had on a sequence of bets that I believed, with every analytical instrument I had developed over a 40-year career, with every piece of data, with every edge I thought I had, I believed would come through. The line moved. The games went wrong. I had enough left for 1 month of rent, or 1 more position. I chose the position. I lost. I loaded the car. I have been in this car for 12 years. 12 years. Kevin has children now. I know because Daniel told me by text once, 2 years ago. I have grandchildren I have never held. There exists a version of this life. I can see it precisely. The way I used to see the trajectory of a market, where I am in a house in Connecticut at Thanksgiving, and there are small children running through a hallway, and Sandra is somewhere in the kitchen, and every room is full of the sound of people who are mine. I do not have that life. I made decisions, not once, not in a single weak moment, but thousands of times, repeated, chosen, each one a small vote against everything that mattered, that ensured I would not have that life. I turn 80 next month. I have a parking permit for this lot, $40 a month, covered by odd jobs I find through a church shelter 2 miles from here. I have a prepaid phone. I have a sleeping bag rated to 20 degrees, and a small battery lamp, and a library card for the Newark Public Library, where I go to be warm and to read and to sit among other people and feel for an hour or 2 like I still belong somewhere in the world. In the inside pocket of my coat, I carry a pawn ticket. It's from 2019. I pawned my Rolex Submariner. I'd worn it since 1992. Bought it for myself after a particularly strong year. Because that's what you did. Because the watch meant something. I pawned it for $320. I used the money for rent that month. I never went back to reclaim it. I've kept the ticket. I'm not entirely sure why. Evidence, maybe. Proof that something real once passed through my hands, and I held it, and then I let it go. The hardest thing about being here is not the cold, though the cold in January is as hard as anything I've ever managed. It is not the hunger, though there are days I allocate what I eat the way I once allocated portfolio positions. The hardest thing is the arithmetic of time. I am 80 years old. There is no recovery window. There is no position left to take, no compounding effect that can close this distance. What I did permanently, and I live in that knowledge every single day, clear-eyed, completely sober, because the gambling did not stop because I recovered. It stopped because there was nothing left to bet. I am not telling you this because I believe you are me. Most of you are not me. But some of you are sitting exactly where I was at 46, at that blackjack table, feeling that first clean silence and thinking, I understand this. I can manage this. I am the exception. You are not the exception. I was not the exception. The casino was built by people who understood exactly what I felt at that table, and who knew with perfect mathematical certainty how it ends. Whatever you are holding right now, whatever you are hiding, whatever you are spinning in the dark, while the people who love you sleep, I am the end of that road, not a cautionary tale. The destination. An 80-year-old man in a Ford Taurus in a parking lot in New Jersey with a pawn ticket in his pocket and 12 years of nights to account for. That is all I have left. That is all I am. But I gave it to you honestly, and maybe that counts for something. Maybe that is the last thing I can still do right.